In parts 1 and 2 of our series, Everything About the Crusades, we explored the reasons why the Crusades began and the key events of the First Crusade. From the ashes of war, 4 Crusader states emerged: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli. These states were not just military outposts, they symbolized the Christian world's aspirations in the East. Yet their fate quickly darkened under internal instability, pressure from the Byzantine Empire, and the rise of Muslim leaders like Zengi. The greatest blow came in 1144, when Edessa, the first Crusader stronghold, fell into Zengi's hands, marking the beginning of a fierce Islamic counteroffensive. In Part 3, we enter a new era of the Crusades, where kings themselves, Louis VI of France and Conrad III of Germany, don royal armor to lead the Second Crusade. This is no longer a journey of nameless knights, but a royal campaign laced with politics, ambition, faith, and ultimately deep tragedy. The Second Crusade began amidst shock and despair. Edessa had long been seen as a vulnerable outpost, yet its fall still stunned both the Eastern and Western Christian worlds. Urgent cries for help echoed across Europe. In 1145, Pope Eugene III officially proclaimed a new crusade, the first to be issued by a papal bull, honoring the legacy of his predecessors. This was the first official document of its kind, tightly drafted to protect the families and properties of those who would take up arms. It reflected the Church's growing sophistication in law and governance. The call to arms was championed by Bernard of Clairvaux, who preached passionately across France and Germany, aided by translators to reach broader audiences. Bernard fundamentally reshaped the ideology of the Crusade. He declared that the Crusade was not merely an act of charity or a military campaign to reclaim the Holy Land. It was a path of love. In divine mercy, Christ had opened a heavenly path for European warriors, a path that led to salvation, offering them a chance to abandon all worldly things and follow him. As in the First Crusade, many common pilgrims responded to the call. However, unlike before, the Second Crusade was led by 2 of the most powerful monarchs in Europe, King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany. Louis was a strong supporter of the campaign from the start, while Conrad was initially hesitant and only joined after being persuaded by the powerful oratory of Saint Bernard. This crusade also differed in its scope and targets. Instead of heading toward a single destination, the Second Crusade unfolded on 3 fronts. While the French and German kings advanced eastward to try to reclaim Edessa, other crusading forces marched to Spain to fight Muslim rulers there, or moved toward the Baltic coast to battle pagan tribes. The political landscape in the east had also changed. The Byzantine emperor at the time, Manuel Komnenos, was far from pleased upon hearing that yet another Crusader army was heading toward Constantinople. The Second Crusade threatened to destabilize his foreign policy, which relied on fragile alliances with Germany, Venice, and the papacy to counter the Normans. Moreover, it complicated his attempts to maintain peace with the Muslim Sultanate of Rum. In 1146, Manuel was forced to negotiate a treaty with the Sultan in order to ensure that the crusading armies would not provoke Turkish attacks on Byzantine territory in Asia Minor. Though this move was strategically wise, it further fueled suspicion among Western Christians, many of whom began to believe that the Greeks had betrayed the true faith. In May 1147, Conrad set out on his crusade, accompanied by numerous German nobles, the kings of Poland and Bohemia and Frederick of Swabia, his young nephew, who would later become Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. However, due to poor discipline among the troops, Conrad's army caused serious tensions when they arrived in Constantinople in September. Despite this, relations between Conrad and Emperor Manuel Komnenos remained relatively cordial. Both rulers were deeply concerned about the actions of King Roger II of Sicily, who had just seized the island of Corfu and launched attacks on the Greek mainland. Conrad ignored Emperor Manuel's advice to take the safer coastal route through Asia Minor. Instead, he led his army directly through the interior. On October 25th, near Dorylaeum, not far from where the First Crusade had once claimed a great victory, his exhausted, poorly supplied troops were ambushed by Turkish forces. The result was devastating. Conrad's army was nearly annihilated. With only a handful of survivors, Conrad was forced to retreat back to Nicaea. King Louis VII, accompanied by his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine, traveled overland across Europe and arrived in Constantinople on October 4th, roughly 1 month after the German army. Some of his more hot-tempered advisors, upon learning that Emperor Manuel had signed a treaty with the Turks at Iconium, completely misunderstood his intentions and accused him of betrayal. They even urged Louis to ally with Roger II of Sicily and launch an attack against Byzantium. However, Louis chose to listen to his more level-headed counselors. He agreed to a diplomatic commitment that any territory conquered during the campaign that rightfully belonged to the Byzantine Empire would be returned. In November, the French army reached Nicaea and received grim news of Conrad's defeat. From there, Louis and Conrad decided to march together along the coastal route. This time, the French led the way, and the army successfully reached Ephesus. There, however, Conrad fell gravely ill and was forced to return to Constantinople, where he received medical treatment under the care of Emperor Manuel. After recovering, he set sail and eventually arrived at the port city of Acre in early 1148. The French army's journey from Ephesus to Antioch during the harsh winter months was an exhausting ordeal. Supplies ran dangerously low, and the Byzantines were unjustly blamed for the suffering. Emperor Manuel was forced to order his cities to defend themselves against the angry Crusaders, leading to more skirmishes with fellow Christians than with Muslims. King Louis began to suspect that the Greeks were deliberately undermining the crusade. By the time they reached Antioch, ruled by Raymond, the uncle of Queen Eleanor, Louis had lost the majority of his forces to Turkish attacks. The original goal of recapturing Edessa now seemed impossible. Nur ad-Din, son and successor of Zengi, had already massacred the Christian population of the city, making any attempt to reclaim and hold it with their diminished army a hopeless endeavor. Raymond urged Louis to launch a campaign against Aleppo, Nur ad-Din's power base. However, tensions flared when Queen Eleanor publicly supported Raymond's plan, leading Louis, possibly out of jealousy or political calculation, to abruptly leave Antioch for Jerusalem, forcing Eleanor to accompany him. In Jerusalem, where Conrad had already arrived, many prominent figures from France and Germany gathered, along with Queen Melisende, her son Baldwin III, and the lords of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, to decide their next move. Although lacking many northern princes and having suffered heavy losses, the Crusaders still managed to assemble a massive army, nearly 50,000 strong, the largest force gathered for a crusade up to that point. After heated debates that revealed deep rifts between the Crusaders and the local nobility, they ultimately decided to launch an attack on the city of Damascus. Exactly how the decision to attack Damascus was made remains unclear. However, there is no denying that Damascus was a tempting target. The city was ruled by Emir Unur, a Muslim leader who had previously cooperated with the Franks, fearing the rising power of Nur ad-Din. But now, caught in a desperate situation, he was forced to call upon his former enemy for help, and Nur ad-Din responded swiftly, marching toward the city. The campaign to besiege Damascus was plagued by a lack of clear strategy and poor coordination. Launched with self-serving motives, it unraveled quickly. On July 28th, after only 4 days of siege, with Nur ad-Din's forces approaching the city, it became clear that the Crusaders were in a perilous position. The order to retreat was given, a humiliating failure, rooted in conflicting interests among the crusading factions. Conrad returned to Constantinople, where he agreed to ally with Emperor Manuel against Roger of Sicily. Louis, however, reacted very differently. Harboring deep resentment toward Manuel, whom he held responsible for the entire fiasco, Louis accepted Roger's offer of ships to sail back to France and even supported plans for a new crusade that would directly target the Byzantine Empire. Yet without papal backing, this plan never materialized. Still, the idea that Byzantium was a threat rather than an ally began to take root across Europe. The Second Crusade had begun with immense enthusiasm and soaring expectations. Its collapse brought profound disappointment. Seeking answers, Saint Bernard turned to Scripture, concluding that the failure was the fault of sinful Europeans. Only through repentance, purification of the soul, and prayer could Christians hope for God's favor and military victory in the future. This belief would increasingly shape Crusader ideology and inspire new waves of religious fervor and lay piety in medieval Europe. For the Muslim world, the failure of the Second Crusade was the greatest source of encouragement yet. They had faced a massive invasion from the West and prevailed. The Crusades up to the year 1187. In the 25 years following the failure of the Second Crusade, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was ruled by two of its most capable monarchs, Baldwin III, who reigned from 1143 to 1162, and Amalric, who ruled from 1163 to 1174. In 1153, King Baldwin captured the city of Ascalon, securing the kingdom's southern coastline. This would be the last major conquest by the Franks. However, the victory was soon overshadowed when, just a year later, Nur ad-Din seized control of Damascus, a move that marked a significant step toward the unification of the Muslim world surrounding the Crusader states. By the early 1160s, Jerusalem found itself increasingly encircled by a rising Islamic power. Meanwhile, the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt, plagued by internal assassinations and palace intrigues, appeared on the brink of collapse. This instability raised alarm bells in Jerusalem, especially considering the growing influence of Syria under Muslim control. In 1164, when Nur ad-Din sent his general Shirkuh to Egypt, accompanied by his nephew Saladin, King Amalric decided to intervene. After a tense campaign and a series of military maneuvers, both Shirkuh's and Amalric's forces eventually withdrew, only to repeat this stalemate 3 years later. During this time, recognizing the need for broader alliances, Amalric sent Archbishop William of Tyre as an envoy to Constantinople to negotiate with the Byzantine Empire. However, in 1168, before William could return with news of a formal agreement, Amalric unexpectedly launched a campaign into Egypt for reasons that remain unclear. The invasion failed, and Shirkuh entered Cairo unopposed. After Shirkuh's death on May 23, 1169, Saladin, then his deputy, defeated the remaining opposition and assumed control of Egypt. By the time the Byzantine fleet and reinforcements finally arrived in late 1169, it was too late. Both the Byzantine and Crusader forces were forced to retreat once more, suffering from food shortages and seasonal flooding. The failed campaign ended in mutual recrimination, with each side blaming the other for the inability to launch a coordinated attack. The rise of Saladin and the decline of the Crusader kingdoms, 1171 to 1187. In 1171, following the command of Nur ad-Din, Saladin ordered that the Friday prayers in Egypt's mosques no longer mention the Fatimid Caliph in Cairo, but instead the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, the recognized head of the Sunni Muslim world. With this act, the Fatimid Caliphate officially came to an end, closing a long chapter of religious division in the Islamic Levant. It was precisely this fragmentation that the Latin Crusader states had long relied on to survive. Ominous developments soon followed the deaths of both King Amalric and Nur ad-Din. In 1176, the Seljuk Turks of Iconium dealt a crushing defeat to Emperor Manuel Komnenos at the Battle of Myriokephalon, a loss that echoed the disastrous Battle of Manzikert nearly a century earlier. When Manuel died in 1180, all hope of any effective Byzantine-Latin cooperation faded with him. Just 3 years later, in 1183, Saladin seized Aleppo, nearly completing the encirclement of the Crusader states in the Levant. By 1185, he agreed to a truce and returned to Egypt to consolidate his position. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Jerusalem faced a growing crisis. Amalric had been succeeded by his 13-year-old son, Baldwin IV, a boy afflicted with leprosy. Though the young king showed remarkable determination and leadership, his declining health forced the kingdom into a cycle of regencies and intensified concerns about succession. Eventually, Baldwin's sister Sibylla bore a son, Baldwin IV, with William of Montferrat. The boy would later be crowned king. However, Sibylla's subsequent marriage in 1180 to Guy of Lusignan, a newcomer from the east and half-brother of Amalric, further inflamed tensions among the kingdom's nobility. A court faction began to emerge, including Queen Dowager Agnes of Courtenay, her daughter Sibylla, her brother Jocelyn III, and now the Lusignan family. Political divisions deepened as rival factions vied for power in a kingdom under increasing external pressure. The road to catastrophe, Jerusalem on the brink of collapse, 1185 to 1187. This royalist court faction frequently clashed with the long-established native nobility, most notably the powerful Ibelin family, Reginald of Sidon, and Raymond III of Tripoli, who was also Lord of Tiberias through marriage. Alongside mounting internal instability, the Kingdom of Jerusalem found itself increasingly isolated. Urgent pleas for aid sent to the west, even those championed by Pope Alexander III, failed to produce any significant support. King Baldwin IV died in May 1185, leaving Raymond of Tripoli, as regent in accordance with previous agreements, to rule on behalf of the young Baldwin IV. Yet when the child king died prematurely in 1186, the court faction acted swiftly to bypass the opposing nobles. They crowned Sibylla as queen, in defiance of the formal succession plan. And she immediately placed the crown upon her husband, Guy of Lusignan, proclaiming him King of Jerusalem. Amid this looming civil war, disaster struck. Reginald of Châtillon, Lord of Carac and Montreal, broke the fragile truce with the Muslims by attacking a merchant caravan. This reckless provocation gave Saladin the pretext he needed to declare a jihad against the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In July 1187, Saladin blocked the main route to Tiberias and dispatched a raiding force to attack the town, hoping to lure the Crusaders out of their defensive position by capturing Count Raymond's wife, who was residing there. Raymond himself initially advised Guy not to fall for the obvious trap. However, in the dead of night, other nobles accused Raymond of treason, and the king was persuaded to reverse his decision. This fateful choice would seal the kingdom's doom. Under the scorching summer sun, the Crusader army marched across the arid plain in a grueling march, deprived of water and harassed by Saladin's forces throughout the night. On July 4th, they encountered the full might of Saladin's army at the Horns of Hattin. The battle raged throughout the day. Saladin's troops set fire to the dry grass, sending choking smoke into the Crusaders' lines. As the infantry crumbled and coordination among the knights collapsed, the fate of the Latin army was sealed. Saladin launched a final devastating cavalry charge. Most of the Crusader knights were either killed or captured. Only a few managed to escape, among them Raymond of Tripoli, Reginald of Sidon, and Balian of Ibelin. The fall of Jerusalem, a catastrophe for Christendom, 1187. King Guy was spared, but Saladin personally executed Reginald of Châtillon, a man he considered a dangerous traitor beyond forgiveness. Around 200 Knights Templar and Hospitallers were also put to death under Saladin's orders. As warrior monks, they were deemed fanatics who could never be reformed. The surviving knights were treated honorably, and most were eventually ransomed. The foot soldiers, however, met a far grimmer fate. Many were sold into slavery. With the annihilation of nearly the entire fighting force of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at Hattin, the Christian cause in the Levant stood on the brink of collapse. As if that weren't enough, Saladin captured one of Christianity's holiest relics, the True Cross. He had it paraded through the streets of Damascus, inverted, in a symbolic gesture of humiliation against the Western Christian world. Following this overwhelming victory, Saladin pressed his advantage with unrelenting speed. He captured Tiberias and launched a coastal offensive, seizing Acre, one of the kingdom's most vital ports. By September 1187, Saladin and his generals had conquered nearly all major strongholds of the kingdom, including every port from south of Tripoli to the outskirts of Tyre. Only a handful of enclaves remained out of his grasp, such as Jubail, Botrun, and Tyre itself. In October, Jerusalem stood virtually undefended, its remaining troops led by Balian of Ibelin. Facing no viable chance of holding the city, Balian was forced to surrender. Saladin allowed the city's inhabitants to leave, provided they paid a ransom. While his terms included provisions for the poor, thousands could not afford the fee and were likely sold into slavery. In Jerusalem, as in other captured cities, those allowed to stay were primarily Eastern Christians, Syriac and Greek Orthodox believers. Later, Saladin even permitted some Jewish communities to return to live in the Holy City, a rare move under Islamic rule. He continued his campaign northward. By 1189, nearly all the territory of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had fallen, with only two remaining points of resistance, the fortress of Beaufort and the city of Tyre. The county of Tripoli and the Principality of Antioch were also reduced to shadows of their former selves, clinging to their capitals and a few scattered outposts. Virtually everything the Latin Crusaders had built over the past century, castles, cities, ports, and sacred symbols, had collapsed in mere months. It was a staggering blow to Western Christendom and a stunning triumph for a unified Islamic world under the banner of Saladin. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey through history fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from the past that still shape our world today. Your support helps keep history alive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.